Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 27. The Damned. Down in still waist-high trench waters, we were both half-soaked but elsewise completely unharmed. All the stained colors of conflict had been washed off us by the motionless main drainage channel that led to the inner chasms and eastern cliffside gorge. The two of us had time to safely climb up and out of it separately as we quickly then began scouting out our downwards journey from its flat upper canal ledges and through the vast long narrow irrigation networks of the uppermost cavern levels. Together following one of a few smaller diverting drain passageways that forked in its spillway towards the jail cells located somewhere on the uppermost levels we were on. No one knew these hidden underground passageways better than Anera did. Unfortunately for us, though, we had to go through them without her helpful guide, keeping ourselves high up in the dry side tracks of the mucky spillways, while we endeavored to move quickly and vigilantly before the soldiers caught up to us. "This way," Arlo indicated, back to holding and tugging my hand as he went on basic childhood memory of where to go. His mostly uncertain directions diverting us down a second side stream we came across as we moved deeper into the lair of his family's gloomy cellar dungeon tracks, traveling inwards towards the more structured areas of the capital's complex undercity. The winding tunnel's chasm cliff drop was a mainstream stagnant rock waterfall to the left of us, but instead of exiting to safety, Arlo chose to follow the low rise and split streams while we perilously continued deeper inland, attempting to stay on the upper level as we left the stormwater drainage tunnels altogether and moved further forwards into the dry depths of the cavernous jail precinct and upcoming prison corridors. Based on the concerned expression on Arlo's face, I could tell he was reluctant to trust me. But even if he didn't believe in the search for answers, he was there beside me to help me uncover the truth and solve the puzzles we were intricately involved in. Our paramount priority was to enter through the dungeons and find Camilla somewhere on the edge of the catacombs in Maxwell's medical laboratory, and work out what Midas meant when he'd referred to her as the key. "The back way to the infirmary is on the right, I'm pretty sure," Arlo said, holding a much keener sense of direction and knowledge about these old forgotten tunnels than I could remember from back when we were all young and adventurous children who used to find some form of a thrill in exploring them. I had turned my back to him for no more than a second so that I could hold my necklace light up and look down the dark, dry clay passageway he pointed his head towards, only to have him aggressively yank me by the back of my grayish-blue dress and sent me swimming straight back into the very last run of side streams of the tunnel we had just come out through. At least that's what I thought at first. The only logical thought at the time as I spat out the stale storm water I this time managed not to swallow and watched the last of the colored dye in my dress be washed away forever. I wasn't hurt by it, but merely just assumed it had to be him that did it. Who else could have done it when the tunnels appeared empty enough? But as I came out of the tiny river, I looked for him as I tried to regain my sense of direction, only to see a quick shadow along the tunnel ceiling, running throughout the darkness too fast to pinpoint. It wasn't one of mine. It moved too quickly, stalking in fast circle strides as if it were toying with us like its prey. Feeling most safe in the water, I was terrified that it was a wild spider. But after watching Arlo spin awkwardly around with hands raised, he seemed to be less amused than he was actually afraid. It was clear that at least he had some clue to the identity of who or what it was, if not just his face on how to deal with it when he didn't have his sword to protect him. We were both caught off guard by the creature as it leapt into him from the darkness of the front of the tunnel we'd been heading down, revealing to us who the attacker actually was, only as she pushed and pinned him forcefully to the wall. Ebony had Arlo in a chokehold. One leg kicked up against his neck area whilst enlarged nails as sharp as claws were dug shallowly into his left exposed shoulder, painfully pinning him against the muddy tunnel wall. "What do you think you're doing?" she yelled angrily in demand of some apologetic response, glancing at me with disgust as I pulled myself up and out of the tiny mud ditch she'd had carelessly spun and hurled me into. "Don't do this for her. Anyone but her," she pleaded to her prince, moving her head to block any sight of me as she attempted to redirect his eyes to remain locked on her instead. "You owe her nothing. What kind of king would forfeit his kingdom for a cursed servant girl? You have to know that she is beyond all realm of saving now." "A good one," I stated on his behalf in between a few short and dry-winded coughs, perhaps swallowing a small amount of muddy water after all, as I continued to cough while moving back up towards them. Too cowardly to do anything else but bicker at her from a short distance away. "Enough of this," Arlo ordered, remaining pinned by his future queen. "Ebony, If you were actually going to hurt me, you would have done it already. Now let us pass," he said to her in his own annoyed frustration, trying once again to move but only being pushed back and restrained harder the second time around. "Can you let me go, please?" Arlo then asked considerately, wielding neither the fortitude or capability to break free physically from her athletic clutches and instead leaving it to a verbal politeness and courtesy in hope she would do so. "You know, my mother told me all about her parents," Ebony said to a shocking revelation, looking to Arlo while she continued to ignore my presence to the side of her. "What do you know about my family?" I inquired quickly, leaving Arlo to look down the tunnelway as he tried to deduce if any more soldiers were coming. "Yes, please enlighten us," Arlo stated. "Enough to know that no amount of daylight could ever purify her tainted soul," she said to him, looking back towards me only to loosen her grip on Arlo and let him go from the cave wall. "I am sorry about your sister, Arlo," she said to him sympathetically. "Don't be. She's not dead. We're going to get her back." I snapped to her resolutely, only to have her turn her back on me and push up closer to her prince. "Don't listen to her, Arlo. She doesn't have any idea what she's doing. You keep helping her and she'll lead you right to your grave," Ebony pleaded toward him. The way she talked and kept her head focused on him was clingy and yet completely fearless, considering the manner of which she kept her head turned away from me, as if I was no threat to her at all. "No, Ebony, you need to listen," Arlo said calmly. "No, Arlo, you listen," she shouted in a tempered outburst, cutting him off before he could explain, only to push him back to the wall and choke him instantly. "You're not thinking clearly, okay? And you're not as indestructible as you might think you are. If you honestly think you and her can find your sister somewhere out there in the abyss, then I might as well kill you both now and save you from a more horrible fate. I'm not here to fight you, all right? Either of you," she added to her own stuttering and emotional frustration. "You're already the king in my eyes, so I won't stop you," she said to him. "But as the next queen, you need to trust me on this. My mother is a seer, remember? And if you go with her, I have a very strong feeling that things won't go well for you. I'm sorry, Ebony, for everything I put you through," he said compassionately, only to turn his back on her and walk away and lead with me. "Stay," Ebony begged, not moving from the spot she stood. "Please just stay here with me." "I'm sorry," he repeated, not turning around as he continued to walk with me down the tunnel. "You're an idiot, you know," she shouted to him upon our exit, both determined and upset, while we continued to walk down the dark corridor. "You're just another idiot running right into their trap," she yelled, remaining still in heartbreak as her voice carried down that corridor just before we turned and lost all sight of her. Without any further distraction, we continued to walk faster and deeper into the opening dungeon tunnels, starting to rush into the more utilized candlelit areas of the old tracks upon our backdoor approach to the infirmary. Just the two of us passing through the jail precincts that were gated with huge square iron bars, abundant in all cave corners along the narrow track. Both of us paced quickly but quietly as we kept silent in reflection upon the echo of Ebony's fair warnings. The harsh truth about those warnings were that she was most likely right and we were indeed walking into a trap due to our one stubborn refusal to call it quits and admit Nara was lost for good. "This way," Arlo directed again, the two of us sharply turning his corner together unconcerned, only to walk unsuspectingly right into the first few rows of jail cells that housed Midas and some of his elderly cronies. Every corner of the dungeons looked exactly the same, and we had wandered right into the confines of his jail enclosure, startled by our own wrong turn, catching the stray stares of a dozen white-haired pale prisoners looking to us with dread. The guards were next to notice us, their boots, swords, and crossbows rattling against the ground and their armor as they turned to attack us, confused as to why we were there, but smart enough to know by all the commotion of the warbells and panic that we were at the center of it. "Please stay right there, my prince," said Adria from under her thick, spiky headgear, an iron-horned helmet and spiky mix of leather, bone, and metal in her bulky greaves and chestplate. Armor looking as if it were made to resemble a woman caught inside the tomb of an Iron Maiden torture device as she walked down the jail corridor and past each individual side jail towards us. We looked at her with a certain degree of shock. She was clearly suspicious of foul play from us, and I didn't think my new friendship with her counted for anything when it came to keeping to her civil duty. She was slowly raising her hand, which held a mace attached to a chained roping flail, as she and her guards slowly stretched for their equipment at the other end of the corridor. Our presence had surprised everyone, but the warden and her jail guards were trained well enough to know the crown had condemned us and we were being chased by the enclosing shouts of an incoming crowd. I looked over to Midas amidst that brief stalemate and confusion we'd brought. He sat slumped down against a blank wooden bench inside the narrow corridor's left corner cage, stripped of all material, other than a plain gray shirt and pants. He looked a little like a coney when he was without his gold crown, the way he scratched his head and wiped his brow. While both curious and confused of our unexpected arrival, was almost uncanny to what his son would have done, given the same situation. At ease, we were just passing through, the prince boldly declared, attempting to downplay our situation as he and I pretended to belong and attempted to walk past. Just hold up a sec, said Adria politely from under her thick metal-horned helmet, her hand holding a flail that dangled just beside us as she and her men blocked us from passing. "Down here! They're down here!" a young villager called out to others from behind us, followed by a string of flustered guards who all pulled up beside the nightly guard captain and prison warden, who had stopped us dumbly beside the front passageway exit we needed to cross in order to reach the next corridor of Maxwell's first treatment room. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any words came out, a solid bang carried throughout the chamber, a decent-sized rock striking me in its ricochet as it thumped against the ground as loud as a hammer. "Well, run," Midas said to Arlo and me, that small rocket by our feet, made of pure heavy gold, incapable of knocking Adria out. But the clang against her helmet was enough to disorientate her and make her sway unsteadily, creating enough of a nuisance for Arlo to throw himself forward and push the whole cluster of guards backwards and tumble through the door. "Behind you," Midas shouted, followed by a flaming arrow sent through the air just as we turned to look. Sever and a small battalion had crept steadily upon us from the rear, his arrow right by my face as one fast hand grip had stopped it from hitting me mid-flight, my face turning to find that recently convicted felon and former Sand King Lord Ares had bent his hand through the bars and allowed the arrow to plunge through his palm, taking the hit for me, his face red with pain as he looked to me, before watching his skin shed and spray out buckets of dusty sand like a storm. The prisoners were all shaking their cages in riot and revolt as they tried to create enough disturbance to help warrant our escape. "Just run," said the Sand King from within the blurry midst, helping cloud our path as we slipped through the corridors and deeper into the infirmary. "Find the truth," he yelled, only to be caught and sidekicked viciously by Sefer as he relentlessly pursued us right down that corridor. We pulled left and right turns immediately, and without inspection, we found the thick pale white tiles of the surgical rooms and locked ourselves into the safety of Maxwell's front treatment lab, sealing the door via its thick metal door. I was ecstatic to discover Camilla sitting there on a bed, a white curtain half closed around her. She was listening to Odie and gazed towards Arlo and me with horror in her eyes, her peaceful smiling stone gnome reporting his version of events with pride, completely oblivious to the grave nature of the Queen's orders. "What have you two done?" she stated in a cold, shivering cower. "My sister has been taken," Arlo said as we glanced around in a very quick inspection for others in the room. "Is it true what Odie has told me? That I have orders to seize you two on sight?" she asked, limping towards us. "Yes," Arlo responded honestly as the door began to bang and shake. At least a dozen authentic infantry soldiers were trying to break through it with sheer determination and might. "Please, Camilla, you have to listen and trust me on this," I began to plead, aware we had little time to convince her of helping us. No. You both have to stop this right now," she begged. "You have no idea about the ramifications of your actions and how they might affect others," she added, her eyes glancing to me in concern. "You both need to turn yourself in, please, before this pursuit gets someone killed." "Kaya will die if we stop," Arlo argued. "Anera too," I added. "Those men have been ordered to kill me," I informed her, speaking over the banging coming from the door. "And your son has been convicted of treason." "No, that's impossible," she stammered, putting a hand to her mouth only to gradually accept it to be so. "How did this happen?" she demanded with tears brimming in her eyes. "We don't have time to explain. We need to get her out of here," the prince said, noticing that the door bolts were all becoming icy cold as snowflakes began drifting into the room. "We really need your help," he said. "Camilla, you've been lied to for a long time, I believe," I said quickly, taking a moment to stop myself as I dared to consider what I was about to say out loud. An accusation I was relatively sure about, but had no direct evidence to back up. I don't think your husband was crazy. The ghosts are real, and I think Melina knew it all along, I stipulated, catching even Arlo by surprise as I said it. Camilla looked to me, more scared by my statement than she seemed shocked or surprised by it, confusing me with how little I thought I had turned her world upside down. Perhaps in denial, or just deep down being that it was something she'd always considered and semi-believed, despite the rest of the known world telling her husband was insane. "Are you going to help us?" Arlo asked. "We need to know now," he stated, waving his hands past his head, distracted by a few tiny flea parasites buzzing around us. At first we thought nothing of it, but before we got the chance to consider why such vermin were in the clean clinical room, they had already began changing color, burning with a bright thermochemical red-hot glow, as they started biting at him. "Arlo," I said to him, scared, only to have a swarm of them come out from the counter, buzzing around me as well. I covered my ears with my hands and my eyes with my arms, feeling them burn and singe my skin as they began circling around, biting me. They left Camilla and Odie completely unharmed, only attacking Arlo and me, their micro-sized assault sending us both kneeling before the floor as we tried to tuck ourselves in tightly in a terrified instinctual defense. "What are you doing to them?" I heard Camilla yell to the doctor. His response was muffled by the sound of iridescent fire-flying gnats that buzzed and scorched us in a tiny yet tremendous level of torment. The sound of them buzzing was more scary and demoralizing than the actual pain and sting of their tiny insatiable bites. "You heard what they said," I heard the doctor announce between waving hand swipes as I attempted to swat away the largest cluster of them. His appearance suddenly profound. The curtain and cupboard door were both open, and I realized he must have been hiding there. "Maxwell, that's enough," Camilla demanded, fed up and having had enough. I swallowed both Arlo and me inside a bubble extracted from each shady corner of the laboratory, synthesizing a seashell that's mouth shut upwards around us protectively like an oyster protecting its pearl. It was a temporary and futile defense, as Arlo and I were left squished together, merely awaiting for each layer or channel to be slowly zapped and burned away as the thick steel doors that held back our aggressors came down with an earth-rumbling thud. We started rocking side to side as soldiers began to break through the thinning layers of the clamshell, the black solid thickness cracking and sizzling like fog as it disintegrated, struggling to resist each of the angry fiery bugs. "Stop this now," Camilla's muffled voice insisted. "I said leave them be," she ordered. "None of us want to do this, Camilla, but we have no choice," the doctor snapped. No more words were said after that. All we heard was rustling. Suddenly, I felt us being weightless and lifted up into the air, much like someone strong was holding us, like we were under the wings of the angels as they flew us from harm. I expected to be greeted by soldiers charging towards us as the last layer was peeled off. But instead of a room with an angry army, I saw a woozy and wounded legioness wobbling to stand upright as she moved between muddy grass puddles in the training courtyard that overlooked the great ocean lookout point. Her giant marble gateway stone sitting alongside the scenic blue-purple nightfall that had already set in upon the world. "I'm going to get you out of here," Camilla vowed resiliently, despite the strong stifling pain of a gimp leg and arm. The scathing restraints Midas put on her were burning into her as bright as day upon the forced friction of teleporting matter external to herself. "Are you going to be able to use the stone?" the prince asked, concerned, afraid for her welfare as he looked at the bright smoldering gold restraints, while she did her best to limp on and ignore them. "Enough of this," my queen roared, jumping upon us out of nowhere, followed closely by more of the most faithful knighted soldiers, their knives, daggers, and swords pressed to Arlo's and my neck as we were instantly surrounded. "Son, it's over." "Is it true?" Camilla shouted to her queen. "Did you charge my son with treason? Were Midas's demons real all along?" she added, unwilling to kneel despite a large number of more lengthy pikes and spears aimed at the tips of her arms, neck, and chest. "If your son does what I asked, he can still be redeemed," Melina replied, ignoring any further questions about Midas. "You can't hurt him, Melina. He's the only hope you have of keeping that Sunspire running," Camilla claimed, trying to reason with her tyrannous-appearing queen. "Yes, you're quite right," she said with a certain sadistic grin towards her old friend. But I can hurt you, she declared, seeing her hot golden bracers for the great source of vulnerability and weakness that they brought her. Bring her husband here too, she commanded. We will string them up right here together, she ordered. In an instant, Camilla vanished again, her ghostly trail easy to follow as a hot red tinge of friction and drag followed the bracers she wore, the distance she made being both minuscule and dramatic. Don't try it, Melina bitterly preached, all of us looking up by the stone she had reappeared before. Her hand pressed against it, despite the cuffs burning bright red on her wrist and leg, looking near combustible as she attempted to activate the stone, the solid marble beginning to look as permeable as water as the incantations flared bright blue as she unlocked the magic of the gateway stone's transport portal. The sky above it sucked in air like a hurricane, while the red-hot wrist and ankle restraints began to turn to blue in conjunction with the color of writing that was inscribed on the dissolving gateway stone, the doorway coming through like a wormhole that led into space, as this time nothing but blackness could be seen through the other end of whatever destination she had chosen. Like stars aligning in the sky, we all suddenly knew exactly what it was. It was a nightmare Midas used to speak of, a world in the shadows, those incantations flaring with the handprint bracers he'd put on his queen as they began to unlock and drop from her skin after communicating with the stone like a crystal, opening up the gateway to the obvious destination he wanted us to explore. Blades flew out towards the stone as they were sucked out of soldiers' hands, the vacuum effect of this destination much more biased and forceful than the typical wormholes Camilla willfully conducted, as everyone pulled backwards, trying to stop it from sucking them in. Close it now, Melina screamed to Camilla. The Legion commander began backing away from it in a horrid agreement with her queen, just as unsure of what was happening, shocked to discover the very shackles Midas had melted onto her had both dissolved and left her skin raw, but as healthy as could have been expected. Upon her exit from the stone, she watched in terror as the wormhole began to flux unstably and collapse. The sight of one deathly gray graveyard and its hillside slope apparent on the other side of the doorway. Everyone was gazing into the blackened void world as if it were exactly that, a different dimension altogether, a cursed place with land all plagued and corrupted. The lot of them watching through that eyeglass portal as a large ring blue corona seemed to be shrinking and expanding violently in preparation of its inevitable collapse. The portal intensified as it began to recede, starting to pull everyone towards it. The soldiers shuffled backwards in surprise, releasing Arlo and me from knife point. This was our only chance to escape, and we didn't hesitate. Arlo and I took one look at each other in unspoken agreement, only to push the soldiers blocking us aside and grab each other's hands as we jumped forward, allowing the vacuum of that dark portal to swallow us both up.